this episode of Real Talk. Real Talk is a monthly show hosted by the Living Legacy Foundation of Maryland that focuses on various topics within the field of organ donation and transplantation. Tonight's topic is myths and misconceptions. My name is Kate Darish, and I'm a hospital service coordinator at the Living Legacy Foundation. I have the pleasure of introducing you to our moderator for this evening, Mary Weedle. Each month, Real Talk will be moderated by one of our Donate Life ambassadors, who all have a special connection to donation and or transplantation. Mary Weedle is a volunteer and advocate for organ, eye, and tissue donation. She serves as a Donate Life ambassador for the Living Legacy Foundation, working information tables to register donors. She is also a Transplant Recipient International Organization in Maryland member and served as the secretary on the TRIO board from 2017 to 2020. Mary received a heart transplant 7 years ago because of a genetic condition, familial hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. She has a Bachelor of Science in Elementary and Special Education with 28 years of experience and is now retired. Mary keeps active with family, friends, church, Bible study, book club, and traveling. She's been married to Kevin for 45 years, is the mother of 3 married children, and has 9 grandchildren. Thank you for being here. Mary, you now have the floor.
Well, thank you, Katie, for introducing me. I really appreciate it. It's now my pleasure to introduce the other members of our panel tonight. First, I'd like to introduce Marcus Walker. Marcus has been a family service coordinator at the Living Legacy Foundation of Maryland, the LLF, for 15 years. His role is to talk to families about organ and tissue donation. He received a master's degree in clinical psychology. Prior to working at the LLF, Marcus had experience working in palliative care, health psychology, and consultation and liaison psychiatry. Our next panelist tonight is Katie Bell. Katie is an Air Force veteran with a master's degree in public administration. Katie originates from Troy, Alabama. She worked as an intelligence officer for the Air Force, and being retired from the military, she is now a university professor. She is married to Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Bell, who works at the Pentagon. She has 2 children, Noah, her son, who is 12, and Elliot, her daughter, who is 10. She has lived all over the world. Katie speaks tonight to us as a transplant recipient. She received her life-saving liver transplant from the University of Maryland Medical Center in Baltimore over 3 years ago on November 14th, 2017. Katie likes to ski. She likes to travel, spend her time with her children and their Siberian Husky, Camden. And finally, I would like to introduce Latrice Price. She has a bachelor's degree. Latrice has been with the LLF for over 20 years, where she has served on several local and national committees. Since 2014, she has served as the manager of Team Maryland. The manager of Team Maryland, a group of transplant recipients, donor families, and living donors who participate at the Donate Life Transplant Games of America. She is currently a board member of Emily Gift Scholarship Foundation and the Veterans Transplant Association. Latrice loves helping others, and she is currently working as a volunteer with Jubilee Art. Well, when we share the education and information about donation and transplantation out in the community, we often hear different myths as well as misconceptions. These myths and misconceptions might seem like harmless rumors, but for transplant recipients like myself and Katie, they can mean the difference between life and death, and for so many people awaiting tissue donation or organ transplantation. When people hear misinformation about donation, they're less likely to donate, and they are making decisions based on myths and not the true facts. We're here tonight to dig into some of those myths and address them and share the truth with you. Do you have a myth? Have you heard things that make you question whether or not you should be a donor? Well, let's know in the comment section what you're thinking and what you've heard so that we can talk about it. We are here for real talk about everything you've ever heard about donation. And now I'm going to ask some questions of our panel that have so graciously agreed to be with us tonight. Latrice and Katie, when you're out in the community talking with people, what is the most popular or common myth that you hear about donation and transplantation when you're out in the community? So Latrice, can you start for us, please?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Good evening, Mary. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. The most common myth we hear in the community is that if I have a heart on my driver's license or if I signed up to be an organ donor, that my life is not going to be saved. It's important that we get the proper information out for people who believe that myth, but that we hear that almost every day, almost at every event, we will have several people come up to us and say, hey, I'm not a donor because if I have that heart, they're not going to take care of me.
Okay, Katie, what has been your experience?
I've heard, thanks for having me. I've also heard a lot of myths. I didn't know anything about organ transplantation until I needed it at 37. And I was floored that all of a sudden what I signed at 16 on my driver's license finally meant something, and I was the one that needed the organ. One of the things I've heard a lot is, in fact, I've had asked of me with another lady I knew asking if we knew someone. It's not about the rich and famous being able to pay a certain amount of money or being able to just know somebody and move to the top of the list. That's been, for me, the most astounding question that I've gotten, because I certainly had just moved from Alaska. I didn't know a single person in the medical field. I knew I was dying and I needed a liver, and it didn't matter where that organ came from. And it didn't matter who I knew. So that's been the most common misconception I've encountered.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Katie. I'm sure a lot of people have heard that type of myth. Marcus, you talk directly to families about the opportunity for donation when they have experienced a great loss in their life. Are there any particular myths that families commonly bring up at the time that you're talking with them?
Yeah, I think similar to what Latrice was saying, one of the biggest myths is that, when I'm talking to families, it's at those end of life decisions. So either the person's has a non-survivable injury, or the person's been pronounced brain dead, and the team is talking with the family about end of life decisions. So one of the biggest things I think is also that, you're just trying to convince me they're dead or they're not going to get better so you can have their organs. Sometimes I've heard that even come up before we're even involved. So one of the biggest things that we end up having to do is to talk with them about the whole separation between the hospital and our organization, that the hospital's concentrated on saving their life. And at those times when those end of life decisions are coming up and there is nothing else that can be done, and if the patient's pronounced brain dead or the family is talking about withdrawal, that's when we get involved. So we handle that separately. We work with the hospital, but we're not a part of the hospital.
Okay, that's a good distinction to make. So I imagine that religion may play an important role for families in these moments. Latrice, you're an expert in the discussing of transplantation and donation with faith communities. Why are there some myths, or what are some of the myths that people believe as it relates to their religion?
Well, we hear a lot of times that, first of all, most major religions support organ donation. And what we hear a lot of times is that people believe that that they have to enter into heaven with all of their organs. They don't want to be missing any organs when they meet their maker in heaven. And so a lot of times we hear people say, it's against my religion, I have to enter into heaven with all my organs. But most major religions support organ, eye, and tissue donation. And so what we do is encourage people to go to the leaders of their faith just to get clarification of what their faith actually believes when it comes to organ and tissue donation.
Well, that's a great suggestion for people. So if they have a doubt, that they should check with their own particular belief system and the heads of their church. Marcus, what do you think is the most important thing when it comes to helping families understand the difference between the hesitations they might be having in donating their loved ones' organs or tissues, and the reality when it comes to making the decision about their loved one, making that, becoming a donor or advocating for them to be a donor.
Mhm. I think the most important thing is information. Um, the more informed you are, the more information you have, the better decision you can make. Um, and one of the things that we always work on is just answering everybody's questions, just about anything, even the ones, one of the things I always think of is answering questions even before they're asked. There are some typical things that families might have in terms of, what's the cost, who's paying for this, or, can I have an open casket or won't be able to have an open casket, and letting them know that, the cost is not on their end, it's our end, and also that they can have an open casket, if they choose to do so. Donation does not prohibit that or interfere with that. Um, but letting them know the answer to those and any questions that they might have. Just because, again, the more informed you are, the more information you have, the better you can, make any decisions.
Okay, that's great to know that the people get those kind of answers that they need, especially regarding finances. I'm sure that enters into some of their minds as well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let me ask this, Katie. We know that there are myths about donations, and they are not only there are. I'm sorry. Let me start again. We know that there are myths about donation, and not only that, it's misconceptions. So, Katie, as a recipient, have you heard any myths that have especially surprised you when you're talking to people about transplantation?
Well, as I just mentioned, I was most surprised, when a family friend asked if we knew anybody. And like I said earlier, I didn't know anybody. I had a miracle happen in that the organ that I was supposed to have, and I matched up perfectly, all based on the labs and the numbers and all the math that goes behind it. Another thing that did surprise me, I had a friend that was working at it was a health fair or something, and he works within the Living Legacy Foundation, and he was really shocked by this question, which in turn shocked me. He was having somebody, talking to people about signing up. And one guy in particular said, "Oh, my brother had a kidney transplant." And he said, "Oh, great. Well, then, do you want to sign up to be a donor too?" And he said, "No, I don't want my organ going to whatever the color of the man's skin was." And I just couldn't believe that even in a time of desperation, that race could still be a part of it in 2021. It boggles my mind. So I think that's the most surprised that I've been in some of the things that I've encountered since having a transplant.
Okay. And myself, as a transplant recipient, the number one question that I often got was, do you know who your donor is?
Oh, yeah.
And having a heart transplant, the answer is no, I don't. I've been in communication just by sending them a thank you letter. And it was 7 years ago. And I know that they received it, but they have never reached out directly to me. So that's always the number one question. Well, who was it? And was it a male or a female or this or that? And I said, I really can't tell you, other than it was a 41-year-old individual who had a brain infection. All right. Well, wow, there are a lot of different thoughts out there and a lot of different myths. I wonder, Latrice, about how there are certain popular myths amongst the people in different communities that you've talked to. What have you experienced?
Most importantly, in the African American community, a lot of people have a huge mistrust of the medical field. As we know, we hear it all the time that we hear people bring up the Tuskegee Project from back in the 40s, I believe it was. And then here being in Baltimore, we get a lot of people who bring up Henrietta Lacks as well. And so they just have a huge mistrust of the medical community. And what we try to do is we try to talk about the process. Marcus talked about the process a little bit, where we let them know we are here. That the hospital is here to help you, to save your life, and that's their number one goal. They're not there to look and see if their heart is on your driver's license. A lot of times they don't even know, and it's not until they've done everything that they possibly can to help save your life. And once they have done everything they possibly can for you, that's when they make a phone call to Living Legacy. So Marcus is not at their hospital hanging out waiting for them to say, we're done. But that phone call does have to be made. And then someone comes on site and assess the patient to see if they're suitable for donation. A lot of times, once people understand and get comfortable with that process, they're usually okay with donation. That in their mind, they think that it's the hospital that's doing everything. They don't realize that Living Legacy is a separate entity from the hospital. I like to, all the time when I do presentations, I bring up Dr. House. I don't know if anybody ever watched their show, but he was a doctor. He was a transplant surgeon. He worked in ER. And I like to say that Dr. House did everything in the hospital but mopped the floor. And when in reality, when we think about our visits to the hospital, when we enter the ER, we see one doctor, and if you get admitted, you go to the floor. You may see another doctor. You don't see that same doctor, but he does everything. And Grey's Anatomy, saying I'm a huge Grey's fan. I've been watching it for over, 15 years. But same thing, we have to realize that those shows are there for entertainment purposes, and that they're a show, and that the real world doesn't operate like that, and things are in place for a reason to protect us. That so that the hospital don't give it to you, like Katie said. People keep asking her, "Did you know somebody?" And so those things are put in place to help protect people who may know somebody. Get it. So I hope that answers that question.
Well, I think that television often can be misleading. It's helpful to get the information out there that transplants are important, but some of them, remember, they have to wind up the story in an hour time. So they can't go through the many steps that it takes for someone to get a life-saving organ, or for someone like Marcus to go in and speak to them in the hospital setting. So you've clarified some of the truth behind those myths. Is there anything else, Latrice or Katie, about the myths that you've heard that you want to clarify about what the actual truth is and how they accept hearing that truth? What is the reaction once they explain it to you?
I was going to say, I don't know how we handle this, but I was reading some of the comments along to the side, Latrice, and I was, are we going to address any of those? Because there's some really good.
We'll get to the questions. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we did address those. With some of the myths, like I said, nothing surprises me anymore. The fact that I had to have an organ transplant, period, surprised me. So I think beyond that, nothing surprises me. So I just continue to be open to any questions that people might have. I lived it and almost passed away and almost didn't make it. So I want everybody to know how important it is to sign up and make sure you're a donor. And if you have questions, ask them, because there's no stupid questions. We all probably have what we consider to be stupid questions, but there's really not when it comes to something this important.
Mm-hmm. Katie, while I have you, I want to ask you this question that came out was, do the recipients take on the DNA of their donor? What do
I'm
you
not
think?
a doctor, but I know that soon after my transplant, I started craving things I didn't crave. Like I craved broccoli and Brussels sprouts and arugula. I didn't touch that stuff before my transplant. And I also noticed, and I think I was telling Latrice this yesterday in an email, I think that my emotions and my emotional state changed. And I don't know, I've spent a lot of time thinking, did it change because of the battles that I went through just to survive? Or did it change because I did know to ask the right questions? I had a phenomenal transplant nurse while I was on the floor at UMMC. And she told me, when you get the call or when somebody comes into your room and says, we have an organ available, you don't turn it down, first of all. And she told me to, even if it was a high risk organ, it's not, or the organ's not, the way that the person died is considered high risk. So I knew that. I knew to ask the person's sex age and cause of death. Now, I've written letters at this point to my transplants, or my donor's family. I haven't heard back. I probably never will, and that's okay. But I did know to ask, about him and how he passed away. So I'm able to just kind of, I knew he was 32. He died from a heroin and fentanyl overdose. And I think as I was saying about my emotions, I feel like I kind of was hardened a little bit. Like I feel like I took on some male characteristics that I never had before emotionally. And like I said, it could be, my donor, or it could be that, I just was hardened. I'm not really sure, but definitely I did take on a lot of different cravings. I would wake up craving Brussels sprouts. Come on. So I would love to meet his family and hear what his favorite meals were, and, just little things about him that I think.
For myself as a recipient, Katie, you had some of those cravings. I never noticed, and it's been 7 years, I've never noticed something that has really been part of a craving, or that I've taken up a sport that I never thought about before.
Yes.
The main thing that I was asked by people was, how does it feel to have somebody else's heart in your body? And I never even thought I would be asked that question. I mean, it never crossed my mind. I just felt thankful and blessed that I had a heart that was active and just sounding like a normal beat. When it was really quiet in my room at the hospital, I heard this normal beating sound, and I hadn't heard that in 20 some years. So that was the big thing for me. And I finally asked my transplant doctor, not the surgeon, but my doctor who's followed me. I said, how do I answer that question? And she said, Mary, remember, it is your heart now. It was a gift given to you. Mm-hmm. And when she said that, I thought, she's exactly right, because we call it donate life. And donate life is a gift. Mm-hmm. And so it's that once somebody gives you a gift, it's yours. It's yours. They meant it to be given, and in this case, to a total stranger. I was the blessed stranger that matched. So that was a good thing. So that for me was an important thing to think about. Well, we've gotten a lot of questions sent in, so let me read a couple of these. Let's see. Let me find one. Here's one. Do you think the hospital kept my son alive longer until they could find a suitable recipient? So Marcus or Latrice, what do you think?
Marcus, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, I'll first say I couldn't say on a particular case. I mean, I don't know that the ins and outs of that case, so I wouldn't know, how they treated her or what. But I will say the way it normally works is they're treating your loved one. They're trying to save their life. They're doing everything they can to save their life. At the point where either that becomes that they're only going to remain in this state, they would have a conversation with the family about end-of-life decisions. Or if that person had a traumatic brain injury and progressed to what's called brain death, they would have that conversation and let them know their loved one was declared brain dead. We come in because they're having the end-of-life decision. All the treatments that's happening before, that's the hospital trying to save their life. If they are successful, we're never even involved. So, I mean, I don't know that that's going to answer your specific question about your case, but we don't come in until the end. So the hospital's doing their part. Then when they come to the end of their road, that's when we come in, to talk about other options.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things too is, and first of all, I want to thank the listener for being a donor family, for making that decision to donate your loved one's organs. And she used the word keeping my son alive. I think, and having known other families that have donated organs, one family, I worked at a high school for many years, and a parent contacted me on a weekend, and she said that her son was declared dead, and he was on life support. He was on a support system that kept his organs living,
Yeah.
but he was not living himself. And so, in order for them to then have the organs donated the next day, she was able to go back to the hospital and say her final goodbyes. And that's when she said that the whole process began in earnest to actually
Yeah.
have the donation of the organs. So, am
Yeah.
I clear about that, Marcus? Is that?
Well, so I'll say that conversation happens about donation, like I said, when those end of life decisions are being made. If the family wants to donate, then the patient would be maintained on the ventilator until the recipients are found. But that's post the family making the decision that yes, they want to do it. If they don't want to do it, then that's where that, the patient would be taken off the vent at that point, or between the doctor and the family. But the stuff the team is doing on the front end is for the patient's care. When I come in and talk to the family, if they want to donate, then it kind of shifts towards doing the stuff to maintain the patient until we can find recipients. But again, that's after the family's aware of that and has said yes, they want to do that.
Right. Okay. One thing an individual said was they were surprised to learn how rare donation is. And they always thought that you could become a donor no matter what, how you died. So, Latrice or Marcus, do you have anything to add to that?
You want to take a
I can, Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I tell the families when I talk to them initially. And people are surprised to learn that you have to pass away on a ventilator in order to be an organ donor. You can still be a tissue donor up to 24 hours after your heart stops. But in terms of being an organ donor, the blood has to still be going to your organs. The heart can only be out of your body for about 4 to 6 hours. So they have to find the recipient who matches your blood type and tissue type before they can actually go to the OR and recover that organ for a recipient. So, yeah, you have to pass away on a ventilator, and I believe it's only about 2 to 4% of people who pass away in that way. You think about it, if you die in a car accident on the site, you couldn't be an organ donor. If somebody died at home in their bed, they couldn't be an organ donor. So you have to pass away on a ventilator, which means you have to be in a hospital at the time.
And that's why we want to encourage as many people as possible to register as a donor, because we don't know the future in terms of how we will pass away. And there is such a need for organs in every state and throughout the whole United States. So anybody that is thinking about being an organ donor, please, let's act now. It's the new year. That's a good resolution.
If I can say something else, and I know I'm being a little bit of a time hog, but
you're good, Marcus. Go ahead.
Go, Marcus.
No, one of the other things, and I've heard this not at a hospital, but in just talking to people outside, of work, that people often think, kind of going along with what Latrice was saying, if they know I'm a donor, they won't save my life. If they know I'm designated, they won't save my life. And I always tell them, actually, if you passed away on the street, they always think like the EMT is going to come there and look at my license and see I'm a donor, so they won't save my life. But kind of, as I said, you actually have to pass away on a ventilator. So that kind of clears up that myth in itself, is that you couldn't be a donor if they looked at your license and decided not to save your life, or not to get you to a hospital because you were a donor. So yeah, it's kind of the opposite in a way.
Yeah. And to add on, like what Marcus said, one of the other things that sometimes I see on Facebook, I don't hear a lot about it in person, but you'll see a story from time to time pop up. Baltimore City is one of the cities in Maryland that always publicize how many deaths they have, how many homicides they have. And a lot of times people on Facebook will comment that these are happening because they are stealing these organs from Black gentlemen to give to people and to rich people. And so that's a big myth that we try to dispel. And what Marcus said is a lot of times those people are dying on the street. Just think about it. Like Baltimore City may have had over 300 deaths in 1 year, and in any given year the most donors we had a few years ago was about 180 something donors, and so those numbers just don't add up. So letting people know that just when people are murdered and die on the street, that they cannot become an organ donor because of the process, and what Marcus said, that they do have to be on the ventilator. And the same thing as the nurses and the hospital staff, that the paramedics, when they come in on the scene, they're coming to save your life. They're not looking for your driver's license. They're coming to save your life.
And that's what people go into medicine, and they do that because they want to be a helper. They want to save lives, and they're looking at that patient right in front of them as an individual. Some of the people have commented that they would like to know who their donor, for instance, someone who's been a donor family would like to know who received the recipient of their son's kidneys were. And so that person would like to find out how to do that. Latrice, what's the best way for them to find out?
Maria,
if that's possible.
Maria, you can reach out to our Family Services Department. You can call Living Legacy 410-242-7000, and we'll probably put that up again. But contact and call that number and ask for our Family Services Department, and they will be able to help you with that. Caroline is the person that coordinates that, and she's great at doing that. So please do that, so you can try to connect with the person that got your sons, I think you said, kidneys.
Okay. And someone was responding saying that they received a transplant back in the 80s, and they couldn't get any information back then about it. And so if it was done in the state of Maryland, was LLF around at that time keeping records, or where would they find out at that point in time?
It's private.
I think LLF came around in 85, I think.
Okay.
That's private information. It's not like you can just call. I can't just call, find out 3 years ago on November 14th who gave me their liver. That's private. And, I've written my donor's family, and it's up to them if they want to respond. Yes. You could probably contact LLF and get the ball rolling, but I like you just said, I don't know if we were keeping records back then or not. Yeah. But even if we did, if they don't want to be contacted, they're not going to be found.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things the way that I found out the sex and the age and what happened to my donor was when we had to submit insurance forms, and we had to get a copy of the surgical report. And we were reading through it, of course. My husband was dealing with the insurance, and we read through it, and he said, look at this. And it stated that it was, I didn't say before, I did say it was a 41-year-old male. I didn't say it was a man, 41-year-old man, and he died of a brain infection. So that was right on the surgical report. So if somebody wants to just find that out, but there's no personal information gone. I've written to my donor family. I sent a present to them this Christmas that I found that was very meaningful to me, and I wanted them to have it to let them know that I'm still thinking all the time about their loved one. And since I received mine January 2nd, I knew that it was during the holiday time. And as long as they receive it, I find out. I had mine at University of Pennsylvania Hospital, so they notify me they have sent something on, and whether or not the family ever chooses to respond, that's quite all right. It's their privacy, and it has to be an agreeable thing. With UPenn, it has to be each side agrees to meet. So anything I have goes right to the organ procurement organization, just like it does in Maryland for the Living Legacy. And they're the middle person. They're the group that handles this type of a thing.
We had another question I think is really good because you just answered it. She said, "Can a woman get a man's heart?"
Yes, yes.
And
Mine is
all of his emotions too.
very well. My friend's husband died in the early 80s, and he was the first recipient, he was the first donor person I ever knew. And John had very thick glasses. And his wife, my good friend Carrie, said, you know, John would be just smiling miles and miles of smiles in heaven, knowing that somebody got his corneas and they now see. And it was a woman in another state. So
Wow.
a man gave his corneas to a woman and she had sight. Let's see, is there
My
any?
donor was a male. I mean, like I said, I think that some of my emotional issues come from now having a male organ. I'm going to blame it on that.
Now there are living donors too. Latrice, did you want to touch a little bit about living donation?
Yes. So Living Legacy does not handle living donation, but here in Maryland, if you were in need of a transplant that could be a living donor transplant, you will go to either one of the hospitals here that are transplant centers, and that's Johns Hopkins Hospital and University of Maryland Medical Center are both transplant centers. And so if somebody was in need of a living donor, then they would go to one of those hospitals and join the program there. For instance, a kidney, and a kidney or a liver, they could get listed, have their donor get listed there, or be a part of one of the programs they had there. But I was saying, Katie, you had mentioned that while you were waiting, that your advice from the transplant nurse has said take any offer. And I was just reading through the comments, and Aaron has received his second liver transplant, and he said his second liver, I think was his second, was a Hep C liver, and that he hasn't contracted Hep C. And so that's great to hear that, you know, if you accepted the high risk organ, that you will be okay.
Yeah, I mean, just because it's high risk doesn't make the organ high risk. The behavior of the donor is what makes them be considered high risk, and his liver was unaffected. So I was very thankful for that.
That's great.
One of the things when I was working at a lot of the tables at the University of Maryland Hospital, people would ask us about, they would say, well, I have hepatitis C and I can't be a donor, or I have diabetes, or I have some medical condition and I can't be a donor. One of our panelists one of our guests wrote in and said his last transplant was from a hepatitis C positive donor. He said he never contracted hepatitis C because of it, and he's very blessed to have even had the opportunity to actually get a third chance at life. So
Wow,
that's wonderful.
Yeah, that was Aaron. That's who I was talking about,
Okay.
Aaron.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't realize if you have hepatitis C, that your organs could possibly be used, because there's a method now by which they can aid the recipient so they do not contract hepatitis C.
I remember a couple of months after, I think it was like 8 weeks after my transplant, and my transplant coordinator, or my nurse practitioner, said, all right, go down to the labs. It's time to get your HIV test. I was like, what? What do you mean? And she said, well, because he died of an overdose with most likely a needle, you got to be tested. And it takes about 8 weeks to show up. And I said, oh my God, like I started panicking. I said, I don't have HIV. And she said, well, don't worry. Even if you do, we have drugs for it.
Right.
Said, okay. Thankfully, I was negative. It was really funny, though.
As we talking about people being sick, I think about people who in the community, sometimes they will say, well, I have diabetes or I have high blood pressure, I can't donate my organs. We encourage people to not let their illnesses like hepatitis C or even HIV nowadays to self-defer themselves, because they now too can be donors, you know. So we encourage people to don't worry about what your illness is. Whatever your illness is, you're going to be fully evaluated at the time of your death, and if you're not suitable for donation, then you won't pass on anything to that recipient person. But hepatitis C does not rule you out. HIV does not rule you out. Diabetes does not rule you out. High blood pressure does not rule you out. So there are a number of things that you can still be a donor. And cancer, as long as you've been in remission for 5 years or more, you're still not ruled out from that as well. So we have a lot of people who try to play the sick card to say that they can't donate, but you still can donate.
All right. And we all have family and friends that bring up donation to us and ask questions. So how would you find a very easy way to explain donation to them, why you would want to be a donor, or why someone should really seriously consider being a donor?
Repeat the question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, we all have family and friends that bring up donation to us, and then they ask questions. How do you explain to somebody what donation is? How would you explain it? Let's say you're sitting around the dining room table and you're with your extended family and they know that you're involved with this or you've had an organ donation. What would you say to them about donation? What would be a really important thing?
This whenever people see you with that Donate Life gear or whatever, they always say, "What's that?" And so I'm sure all of us have those conversations all the time. What I explain to my family is, it's a personal decision, but it's a good decision, and it helps save lives. One person, like myself, could save the lives of 8 people and enhance the lives. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to say save the lives of 75 more people with tissue donation. But talking to them, letting them know that, because a lot of times they believe in that biggest myth that their life isn't going to be saved, or they heard somebody who knows somebody who this happened to, just having a conversation with them to try to get an understanding of what their concerns are, and trying to make them more comfortable about whatever their concerns may be.
One of the things I try to encourage people to do is, if you have registered to be a donor, talk to your family and tell them that you are registered as a donor, and that if perchance you are ever in the situation of the type of death that you have, that you can be a donor, that you want them to say yes. And I do know that this happened. Like I said, I worked at a high school, and a young man was so excited when he got his license because he got to sign up to be a donor. He was more excited about that than actually getting that license. And he told his mom and he told his dad, and that's when he was 16. Fast forward about 3 years, when he was in college, he was a sophomore in college, and he had a brain aneurysm, and he ended up being brain dead, and he ended up being a donor. He was able to donate his lungs to a man that had suffered from lung disease since he was a little child. And I remember this young man. He had come home from college, and he had had a discussion with his family because something came up on television about organ donation. And he said, "Now remember, I want to be an organ donor." And within just a matter of weeks later, they were in that position, and they said they knew what their son wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And his recipients were eternally grateful. And I had the opportunity to actually meet back at our school. Two of his recipients came and spoke to the student body about what a great young man, this young 19-year-old, 20-year-old was for him.
I wanted to say something. I've watched these comments come in from Maria, and I think you said you lost your son in April. And I know that you may not ever know. I'm going to cry because I have a son who's about to be 13, and I just think of what I went through, and life is not promised to us, but I just feel towards you so much sympathy and empathy because I was on the other side of it. But I know that you're so proud of him. I would be so proud that he donated his organs. And I really encourage you to continue to reach out to people like us, because we all have different walks of life and we've all walked through this in some way or another, but you're not alone. I just hope you feel that tonight.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Maria, for
That's
sharing.
great.
Yes, great.
Yes, thank you, Maria. All right. Is there anything else? Well, any further comments at the end? I guess the one thing that we really want to make sure to do is give people the ability to ask for help from LLF. And what advice would you give anyone watching tonight that would want to ask more questions about some of the concerns they have about being a donor, or some misunderstanding they might still have about being a donor? How can we help them learn more about it?
Katie, you want to?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we said
I'm sorry.
Visit the www.llf.org or thellf.org to learn more. You can reach out to obviously Latrice or Marcus, or either me or Mary. We can help if we need to, but llf.org.
Thank you.
Can I put a plug in for my group that I'm in support? Well, LLF supports us a lot. Trio Maryland is an international organization, but Maryland, we have our own chapter. And Trio is Transplant Recipient International Organization. And we're doing monthly online talks with doctors and different people involved in the transplant process for our organization. I went there as a recipient because my daughter found out about it from somebody else. And it's made up of people that are waiting for transplants, people that are just interested in finding out more about transplants. So there is a Facebook page for them, and you can also find them on the internet, but it's triomaryland.org. TRIOMD.org. And you can find out all about us. And on Facebook, it's the Trio of Maryland. So anyway, just had to put a plug in for a group that I've supported a lot. And that's how I came to know about LLF, because my transplant was out of state.
Yeah.
Marcus, you have any last words?
The only one thing I want to say is again, information is key, and information is power. So the more you know, the more you can know for yourself, and the more you can know for others. One thing actually that Mary was talking about with talking with your families as well. We have the whole designation thing, and it's wonderful when people designate themselves. But I always want them to also share with their families. Mm-hmm. Even more important for me, at least, in talking with the family in that moment. When a family says, "Oh, we talked about this, and this is what he wanted to do," it's amazing the energy that comes off of that, because, they feel like they're advocate at that point. It's like their loved one has died, but they're going to do something, almost carrying out their last wish for them. So it's an amazing thing for the family to know that information going in. I always say, tell your family your plans. If you're designating yourself, tell your family you're designating yourself, or either way like that.
I would agree with Marcus that would be one of my closing statements, would be to tell your family, and remember, you're not too sick to donate if you would still like to sign up to become an organ donor. And remember, we don't get into arguments with people about their religion, what they believe for donation. We trying to just think of some other closing remarks I would like to say, but I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And again, Katie said, well, Rebecca says, thank you for joining us. And you and your organization are very appreciated. And I'm grateful. Never thought I'd be in this situation, but glad you all were there. Stay well. Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing that comment. I just want to say thank you all for joining us tonight. Myths, misconceptions is very important. We hear this all the time, and I think we can go on and on and on for 2 hours about what we hear a lot in the community. But I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Mary and Katie, who are volunteers for the organization, and Marcus for joining us tonight, and Kate Darish for opening us up today, this evening. But again, to reach out to get more information, go to www.thelllf.org, or you can call us on the phone. 410-242-7000 is another way to reach us. But we are hosting Real Talk third Thursday at 7 p.m. every month. The next one will be next in February the 18th. And Real Talk will be discussing importance of Black Lives Matter and organ donation in Baltimore City, which has been a hot topic this past summer. Mm-hmm. So hopefully you all that are out there chatting away, keeping us company, will be able to join us, and tell your friends and your family to join us as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Be healthy.
Absolutely.
You too.
Yeah, be healthy.
Bye-bye.